Good evening, good evening, good evening, one and all. So happy to have you here at the Columbus Public Library with us for this, the culminating event of our NEA Big Read celebration of the theme, Where We Live. I'm Henry McCoy. I am the Programming and Media Content Coordinator for the Chattahoochee Valley Libraries. And we knew we'd have a crowd for Alan Levi, but I think y'all have outdone yourselves. So welcome. For those of you coming in late, there may be a chair or two open at the back. We do have some green chairs over here that you can slide out. I just ask that we have these aisles here, that we keep them clear in case we have a fire drill or something. We hope that doesn't happen. But do keep the aisles clear. A little bit of housekeeping. Mr. Levi was pre-signing, but we had to wrap that up quickly because we had to get tonight started. So some people have numbers that they've already gotten. They will be the first in line for the autograph line, but it's about 10 or 12 people. It's not a lot. Immediately after that, after the presentation, head over here, and this is where Mr. Levi will sign books until there are no more books to sign. And he'll be happy to hug your neck and say hello. Just a quick survey. How many of you are not from the Columbus area? Wow. Ooh. Welcome. We're so happy that you're here. We are so happy that you are here with us. I know we have some folks from Macon. I met somebody from Asheville, North Carolina. We have a gentleman and his wife here from California. Thank you for coming, sir. We're happy to have you here at the library. Anybody else from far? Anybody from out of country? That would really be impressive. Oh, where from? From Normandy? Germany. From Germany.
How about that?
Very good. So the NEA Big Read is a program of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. Its purpose is simple. They give funds to communities to celebrate literature, and this year to celebrate the theme, Where We Live. And we have been having a ball here in Columbus for the last 8 weeks. We had author Theo Jones from Atlanta, who spoke to several hundred people also at Columbus State a few weeks ago. We had our local artist, Bo Bartlett, give an incredible talk of his work at his gallery. We had the exhibition of Let Us Now Praise Famous Men here. But there was this book that started appearing in 2023 called Theo of Golden. And we started to get the little whispers that we hear at the library. Have you read this book? Have you read this book? And so we read this book. So when we had the theme of Where We Live presented to us by the National Endowment for the Arts, we knew that we had to wrap it up with this event. So on behalf of everybody here at the library and our director, Alan Harkness, who cannot be with us, on behalf of the Muskogee County Library Foundation, who is our fundraising group, and Laura Ann Mann, the director, is here with that. On behalf of our presentation partners, the Carson McCullers Center for Writers and Musicians at Columbus State University, welcome. Let's get started. So this fine gentleman here on my left is Cameron Bean. He currently serves as Vice President of the Flournoy Development Group, which he joined in 2021. Prior to that, he had an extensive career here in Columbus and abroad in the nonprofit and the higher education sectors. He is a certified fundraising executive. He serves on the boards of probably every nonprofit institution here in the region and state. Most importantly to us here at the library, he is currently the state chair of the Georgia Humanities Council. We've been lucky to be a grant recipient of that. So Cameron, on a personal note, I've worked on boards with you. I've worked with organizations with you. You make this town come alive. You make things like this happen with your fundraising expertise. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Tell me who's going to embarrass me.
And to Cameron's left is the reason we are all here. Alan grew up in Columbus. He attended the University of Georgia for degrees in English and law, and he worked as an attorney from 1980 to 1990. He left the law practice for 2 years in 1990, moved to Scotland, and while there received a degree in Scottish fiction from the University of Edinburgh. He then returned home, resumed his law practice for 3 years, and he finally ventured into vocational music in 1996. And since then, he has worked extensively as a traveling musician, sharing his whimsical, thought-provoking brand of songwriting and storytelling to audiences across the United States. He has over 20 albums to his credit, as well as hundreds of other unpublished songs. Now, in 2014, he published The Last Sweet Mile, which is the memoir of his close friendship and relationship with his brother Gary, who passed away in 2012. And he also wrote and published a children's book, Olivia Town, which has received several children's theater publications and is quite popular here in the Chattahoochee Valley. So, his first novel is Theo of Golden. We're going to hear a little bit more about that novel in just a minute, I expect. But you are currently working on the sequel, Ellen of Golden, which I hope we'll hear a little bit about also. So when he's not reading or writing, Alan cares for his family acreage, where he lives with his father, who's 97 years young. He tries to spend time with family nearby. He keeps a full schedule of involvement in the small community around him, and he dreams of being an artist someday. We are so thrilled to welcome, with Cameron Bean, Mr. Alan Levi.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to acknowledge Henry as well. And we have one of the best libraries in the country, I think. So let's just thank. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. I'm good. This is, it feels like a high school reunion of
Yeah.
sorts.
That's what I was thinking.
You know, usually if I'm out of town, I can exaggerate, I can stretch the truth, I can tell lies and get away with it, but there are too many people in the room who know me. That won't happen tonight.
I know. We talked about this. It was like, it's just going to be like sitting on your front porch.
Yeah, it is, really.
It feels a little different than that.
What a treat, though. I would like to begin just by saying thank you. So first novel, I was very diffident as I wrote it, and I was very reluctant to publish it. That was never my intention. I just wanted to prove to myself I could write a piece of long fiction. And when I was encouraged to publish the book, which I did with my niece, Erin, who's here tonight, just a self-publish sort of thing, we had no expectation of what would happen. Certainly not that many people would ever find or read the book, so we have been so pleasantly surprised, but especially pleasantly surprised and honored that friends of ours, local people like yourselves, most of you, have spent 10 or 12 hours of your life reading this story. So many, many thanks to you. I'm beyond honored, and I hope I will do the city proud if I get to write some more in the future. But this is a book, as you know, about you. Some of you are probably in the 94 portraits that are down on the walls of the Fountain City Coffee Shop. And if your portrait is there, why haven't you bought it? I'll stop there because Cameron might have a question that we'll get into.
No, that's great. I was thinking about how how this book has probably changed your schedule a little bit. Not just writing it, but doing programs like this and having conversations with different communities and how different it would be elsewhere.
Yeah.
But this is the community of Golden.
Yeah,
right?
this is it.
And how different it might feel, tonight.
It has changed my schedule a bit, Cameron, but probably not as much as you would think. I'll tell you a secret, and it's almost like a cruel joke that God has played on me. I do not like to be in front of people. And every job that I have had in life has required me to be in front of people a lot. But being with you, it doesn't feel like I'm in front of people. I see my friend Don over there. I see my old partner, Joel, over here. I see April sitting back over there. I saw Ed and Sharon coming in a minute ago. I see John, old high school friend of mine. I feel like I know many or most of you in the room. There's Beth and Tribe over there. So good to see y'all. And so this is really, it is like being at home.
Yeah.
And I'm honored that y'all gave up your evening to be here tonight. I must make one statement about the people who came from a far distance. These are my new friends, Don and Jan Barton. They came from California for this. So, I told them earlier that we have a suspicion out here in Georgia that everybody in California is crazy. And we now have proof that it is true. Thank y'all though for coming tonight.
Yeah. So as far as the venture into becoming novelist and author, which I think is a fair title. I know you're reluctant to claim that title, and I think everyone here would help cure you of your imposter syndrome there.
Yeah.
You know, the book had been at number 6 on Amazon sales in the category of classic American literature. And I think it's a wonderful thing. There was...
I did point out to Cameron, and I did ask my niece, doesn't someone have to be dead before they qualify as classic?
I think you're a classic American.
Well, there you go. If that's not the case, please don't tell anyone that I'm still alive and well.
I think it's right after Catcher in the Rye, so you know, pretty good, pretty good company on that list. But transitioning, writing songs, 3-4 minute songs, lyrics, where you have this brief moment to tell a story or get a message across to how many pages? I don't know. I'm looking forward to reading it, by the way. It's
the perfect interviewer.
no, it's but what was that transition like as a writer?
Yeah. It was dramatic. Simply because writing a song, at least the way that I used to do it, it might be an hour's worth of work. It might be an afternoon's worth of work for one that was really challenging. It might be a day or two at the most. And, 16, 20 lines of lyric. I loved writing songs. I still love to write songs. Mostly because it makes me attentive to the world around me. Most of the songs that I've written have never been shared with anyone. But as a songwriter, I woke up every day for 20 plus years mindful that somewhere out there was a song that I wanted to write. And so I was constantly mining for the material. And most days I found it. There were years that I would write 300 or 400 songs. Again, most of them not worthy of anyone's attention. But it was a quick exercise. And I was able to move around a lot. I could write a song in the morning and then spend the rest of the day working out on the land. And so there was a good balance to my life. When I started writing this long piece of fiction, sitting for long spells and working day after day, week after week, month after month on the same thing, it was torturous at times, is torturous at times. And so the adjustment has been pretty uncomfortable, honestly. Thankfully, I enjoy the challenge. And everything that I've ever done in life has required words. Lawyer, judge, singer-songwriter, now whatever I am. But I love words. And my guess is that if you're here tonight and if you've read this book or read other books for pleasure, then you're a lover of words yourself. You are verbivores. And so it's a real pleasure to do what I get to do now, and I feel privileged to do it. I do spend a lot more time now alone than I did as a singer-songwriter. Typically, I'd write songs to go perform somewhere. And so I was thinking, okay, I've got to play in St. Louis tomorrow night. I want to write this song about whatever. And I would do it. I would go play the gig. I was around people a lot. I was moving a lot. And now, I could sit home for a month, 2 months, and hardly see anyone and just write and think. And that's been a bit of a stretch for me. I don't mind being alone. I don't mind leaning into a project like that. I like the challenge of it. But I'm finding lately that I'm having to be very conscious to keep some balance in my life. And I've got some things that I do routinely up in the county where I live, up in Harris County. I go to the high school in the mornings to greet kids Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I read to kids on Thursdays. I've got a men's group that comes to my house Thursdays. And so I've got some things built into my life to require me to leave the farm and to engage with people. But for that, I might just hibernate and write all the time because I love it.
Yeah. You mentioned attentiveness, which is certainly a theme in the book.
Yeah.
I did actually read it.
Thank you.
It's certainly a quality of Theo. But I think, especially in this community, for those of us who know you, I think we see so much of you in a lot of these characters. We see your life's experiences, the various jobs you've worked to hold down, and so talk a bit more about that attentiveness and that presence, the importance of that in just humanity in general.
Yeah. Attentiveness. There's a writer who once made the observation that attentiveness is a moral act. And the way that we attend to other people often draws out the person that we want to encounter. So if we meet someone and our hearts and our eyes and our hands are open to that person, they usually respond in kind. But our attentiveness to the world, I think, says a lot about how our hearts are toward the world. If we see something of beauty and we treasure that and we want to curate that in some way for the benefit of a community, or take care of the land, things of that sort, engage with creation. Attentiveness, it does kind of reveal what's inside us. I read something yesterday, a wonderful essay by a writer named Clyde Kilby in a book called The Well of Wonder. And he says he used to walk through the forest with a guy who was a forestry man, but it was all a commercial thing for him. And so when he paid attention to the forest, it was just to determine how many board feet there were per acre. He said he also walked through the forest with little kids, and they were looking for hobbits, and they were looking for goblins. That's the way they paid attention, and that's the way that they engaged with the creation about them. And he said, I would much rather walk through the woods with a kid than with a guy who can calculate the board feet. And when it comes to people, Theo was a man who was extremely attentive to people's faces. He wanted to engage them with a just and loving gaze. And especially now, when I started writing Theo, the temperature was pretty hot in the country. Just the acrimony that seems to have washed over us the last few years. And it seemed like a good book to write at that time, just as an antidote to maybe some of the meanness in the air. But I think that, when we engage with one another, if we work together, if we look at one another, if we have a real conversation, then there's a real good chance that the things that divide us now become smaller and smaller. I hope so. But attentiveness was also kind of a skill, maybe for lack of a better term, that I brought to music as well. Again, waking up every day looking for something to write a song about. Can I tell you an idea I had today? Song idea. I have no idea how I will turn this into a song, but I was working on the new book this morning, sitting on the porch of my house, and I left the door open, and a bird flew into the house. And y'all have had that happen before, maybe. It's hard to get a bird out of your house. So I went in, and the bird was banging into the windows, right? And I realized the bird's going to hurt himself, herself. I'm going to close all of the shutters so that the only light that is available to this bird is the door. And so I went in and I closed all of the blinds. And sure enough, the bird flew right to the light and out to freedom. There is a story in there somewhere. There is a parable, there is a sermon, there is a metaphor, but when everything else goes dark, we look for that one source of light. So if I weren't attentive, I'm sure I would have missed it. And believe me, I'm no expert at this. My guess is that this is a room full of people that do it better than me. But to go through life bored is just anathema to me. People ask me, because I live in a small town, I'm a single guy, don't have a family. They say, don't you get lonely and don't you get bored living in that little teeny place all by yourself? And I usually respond, yes, I get lonely. Everybody gets lonely, but I don't think I'm any lonelier than the most happily married people I know. We are all royalty in exile, and there is a homesickness that comes with that. So we're all lonely at times. But when it comes to the boredom thing, I have no idea what you're talking about. Where I live is the most inexhaustible source of wonder. And I really mean that because I think this idea of attentiveness has become very real to me. And the thought of going through life without a sense of wonder or amazement I can't imagine it, honestly.
And definitely a quality of an artist as well.
It is. It is.
Theo. And I tell you something that was interesting that you just mentioned about that bird. I remember your dog Tyler, who helped you write a lot of your songs.
He did indeed.
And now this bird has helped you write a song.
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
Is there any wildlife that contributed to this novel that
You know, I mean, no, not in the sense that you mean it. There are no talking animals in Theo of Golden, in case you haven't read it. But there's a lot of nature in it, right? I mean, Ellen gave Theo the little ride down on the river walk to see the bird nests and to see the kingfisher and whatnot. Flowers, the flora and fauna of the area are all engaged. And those are hobbies of mine. Where I live, I'm surrounded by acreage. I love plants. I love birds. I love to watch birds and do everything I can to cultivate the presence of birds on the land. So to that extent, yeah, nature is definitely in here. And writing a book is kind of an excuse to research things that you might always have wanted to research or read about. You can kind of run down the rabbit trails. And so a long piece of fiction like this just gave me permission to study cellos and all sorts of things. Port wine. I did take a trip to Portugal in the name of research, and yes, I did write it off. It was a deductible expense for book research. I think my next book, Ellen of Golden, is going to be set in Paris. I'm not sure. But it was really great to go there, and again to just kind of open my eyes and see what was there. That's where I learned about where Theo grew up, and I found him when I went to Portugal. It was to find where the old man lived, and when I went up to the north part of the country, that's where I found him.
So is this a novel that you always knew you wanted to write? Did the inspiration come from entering the coffee shop?
It did, yeah. No, there is a novel that I would very much like to write. It will be a piece of historical fiction, which I've been ruminating on it for a decade or more. And so I was thinking, well, if I want to write that one of these days, maybe I should try my hand at another book first, just to kind of figure out how to do it, make my mistakes on this and put that in a drawer and leave it. But no, I was in the coffee shop, and honestly, it's just like I said, I was waiting to get my order, and I love Gary Pound as a friend, and I love his work. And I go to the coffee shop many, many times just to look at the portraiture there. And so I was kind of looking around the room, and the idea came. I did wonder, why don't people buy these? If not the subject of the portrait, someone who loves the subject of the portrait. And so I bought 5 that day. And when I got home, I leaned them against the wall. And when I was writing, there was Ellen, and there was Manette and Kendrick. But when I went into the shop, the seed corn was planted, and I didn't have a story idea, but I thought, well, let me just start writing and see what happens. And this is what happened.
And so what else did you do to prepare to just write a novel? Did you read about writing? Were there any authors that inspired you whose form or style you admire?
I'm a really poor reader, but I am a voracious reader. I'm a poor reader in the sense that I don't remember titles, I don't remember authors, I don't remember the content of books lots of times. But I explain my reading this way, which may or may not be a very good justification, but I read to be changed. And if I happen to remember it, or if I happen to acquire some information that's helpful, then great. But if I forget everything about the book, if I feel like somehow it has changed me or opened my eyes to something, then it's been a good use of time. So to answer your question, Cameron, you could say that I had been preparing this to write this novel for decades just by reading. For most of my adult life, I've not had a television. And that's no virtue on my part. I just didn't have the discipline to turn my television off when I got home from work each day, so I got rid of it. And that's when I started writing a lot more songs. That's when I started reading more. And so all of that, in some sense, has been preparation. But as far as this specific project, no, I just sat down and I got a pencil and I got a pad and I started writing, which reminds me of a friend of mine, Joe Sutphin, who's an illustrator, a world-renowned illustrator. And he came to spend a week with me at the farm one time, and I told Joe, in all seriousness, I want to be an artist. I want to learn how to paint and draw more than anything. And he said, have you already got some pads? And I said, man, I've got every kind of pad in the world for every kind of medium. He says, have you already got some paints? I said, yeah, I've got every kind you can have. Oil, gouache, watercolor, acrylic, I've got it. He said, have you got all the different kinds of pencils and pastels? I said, I do. It's all back in the back of the house. And he said, well, have you drawn anything yet? And I said, no, I haven't. And his advice, which I think was very sage advice, he said, go to Office Depot and buy you 500 sheets of copy paper. It'll cost you less than $7. And get 10 number 2 pencils. It'll cost you probably $1 or $2. And draw on every piece of that paper. Draw, wad it up, throw it away, and then do the next page. Well, what's that got to do with your question? At some point, I realized if I'm going to write a book, I've got to pick up the pen and I've got to sit down and I've got to start writing. And so I started writing. And I don't remember if I wrote something that I thought would be a scene in the book. I don't think I started on page 1. I just started writing, and the book really became a mishmash that I had to figure out how to sequence. But there was no preparation other than the preparation that all of us do by living life and paying attention and taking notes and having conversations and talking with people like Tom Flowers, who I love, and then just bringing it together and hopefully having the discipline to stay with it to the last word. It's hard work. Maybe other writers in the room would disagree with that, but for me it has been torture to stay seated and to wrestle a good sentence to the mat. But it sure is nice when you get to the period and you realize that's a good one.
Yeah. And you're inspired to do it again.
Yeah.
How did you choose Ellen out of all the characters in the book?
Yeah. It was a toss-up between her and Tony. I really liked Tony, the bookseller. But I don't know, there was just something about Ellen, her backstory. I was wondering, how does someone who is so well-read, so erudite, and so eccentric, how does that character come to be? And I wanted to explore that, and so, and again, I didn't know her story. I will tell you this, that Theo has a lot of sweetness in it, I hope. I mean, that was intentional. I think there's a lot of reality in it as well, but Ellen's story is going to be a lot grittier, because the only explanation that I can come up with for the composite that she is, erudition and eccentricity, is trauma. And so, you know, it's a bit grittier, but there's still some really, I think, going to be some beautiful moments. I will make this disclaimer, though. I told my niece, who works with me, Erin, it's funny how that started. I hired her to work for me. I now work for her. And she has told me that I must work on this book. So I told her, I said, well, my commitment is I will finish it. But I am not committed to publishing it unless I'm satisfied that it's worth your time. And so I'm working really hard on it, and there are some really beautiful moments in it, I think. But there's some grit in it as well. So I just thought she would be maybe the most interesting of the lineup. But I think every character, you know, could deserve their own book.
Yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah. We think so too. Yeah. So, doing functions like this, you get questions and you receive letters and book reviews, and what is something that a reader has maybe taught you from what you wrote that wasn't necessarily intended?
You mean from the book? That they took something from the book
Yeah,
that I didn't take from it? You know, the consistent response that I get from people, and people have been so kind. I didn't know that people wrote letters anymore. But golly, the letters that we have gotten. And I'm sure it's just the kindness of God, because he knows that I would throw in the towel on this venture at the drop of a hat. And so I've been getting lots and lots of encouragement, but the attentiveness theme is one. And the one thing that I hear, and I guess this isn't altogether a surprise, but people say that the book has encouraged them to be more conversational. And just to be with one person and to spend time with them, ask good questions, look in the face, get in a quiet place. The fact that a book can move, not just this one, but any book can move us to change patterns in our lives or to take on new habits that are good and would contribute to the flourishing of a community or even to ourselves. That's something that I guess has been reaffirmed in my own thinking, just to know that people benefit from Theo of Golden. It just reminds me the power of a good story. But as far as anything specifically, Cameron, I'll probably remember when I'm driving home tonight. That's another reason I don't like doing these a whole lot, because I kind of beat myself up going home and I say, I didn't answer Cameron's question. But y'all are Columbus people and y'all will forgive me, so it's no big deal.
That's right. Yeah. What about the name Theo?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, this is an audience from Golden.
Right.
Many of us know Gary Pound.
Mm-hmm.
He has a son named Theo.
That's right.
And my immediate thought was, oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
And I think his middle name might be Golden even.
Well, you know, his mom, Barbara Golden, Golden Foundry. His grandfather was Theodore Golden. True confession, that was nowhere in my thoughts when I chose either Theo or Golden. I love Gary. He's a dear friend. And maybe subconsciously it weaved its way in.
But there's a deeper meaning.
There is. And I offer this just in a spirit of full disclosure. This isn't a bait and switch. I don't have an agenda. But I'm a follower of Christ. That defines who I am. Everything I've ever written is a reflection in some sense of that part of who I am, which is everything of who I am. But Theo is a God word. Theology, theocracy, theodicy, there's all sorts of words. With Theo as the root, it means God. And I wanted the character to at least have attributes that to me are godly. To be joyful is a godly thing. To be attentive is a godly thing. To be kind and generous and forgiving and accepting, all of those to me are attributes of God. And I wanted that to be a part of the character. And then Golden, the reason that I chose that name, I think I started off, Cameron, arbitrarily just filling in the blank to have a name for the city. But when I went to Portugal and was up in the northern part of the country, the Douro River, where Theo grew up, means golden. I think I make some reference to that in the book. But I like the term golden. A little side story, I had gotten well into the writing of the book. I was really happy with the name Theo. And so I thought, this is going to be my character's name. And when I went to Portugal, I took a nephew with me, and I said, be on the lookout for anything that looks like Theodore or Theophilus. Let's find a Theo name to authenticate the title of the book. And so we had been there a few days and didn't see any sign of it, but we went to a museum one afternoon, and it had recently been renovated. And they had a wall, this long wall with probably 10,000 names on it of people who had donated to the restoration. And I said, you start there, I'm going to start here, we'll meet in the middle, but let's find Theo, he's got to be here. And we met in the middle, and not only was there not a Theo, there was not a TH. And we realized that the digraph, TH, is not a part of Portuguese. And I was really despondent. I thought, I can't do it. I cannot change the name. Well, I flew another nephew over to spend some days with us. He was a lot smarter than the other two of us, and I thought maybe he could conjure up a TH for me. But we were walking down a sidewalk in Porto one evening. They have lots of sidewalk cafes. And I turned my head at the exact moment, a second sooner or later, and I would have missed this. But I turned my head and I looked between the sea of umbrellas, and maybe 20 yards away there was a sign that said, Theo's Bar and Grill. And so, I'm serious, it was like an epiphany. And of course you can imagine where we ate supper that night. But I asked the owner, tell me about the name. He said, well, we're Greek, but we've been here for generations. I said, that's good enough. Yeah. And I took the picture, and I've got the proof that Theo lives in Porto, Portugal.
I was thinking Theo is Greek for Applebee's.
There you go. Yes.
So the timeliness of, and probably the timelessness of the themes of kindness of strangers, very present in your songwriting, very present in this book. Encouragement. What has drawn you to the concept of how we respond as people, receiving kindness from unexpected places, from people we don't know, you know, as opposed to the kindness shown to us from friends and family?
Yeah. Well, just as a general response to that, just with the idea of kindness, I think all of us gravitate to that. You know, whether we are on the giving or the receiving end of it. There's an adage that says that kindness is the language that the blind can see and the deaf can hear. And again, that is an attribute of the one who I follow, kindness. And so that's the wellspring, that's the fountainhead of the kindness thing. One of the things about Theo that I like as a character was his insistence on remaining anonymous, which is consistent again with the teaching of Jesus. He said, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing when you're being generous or kind to people. If you're like me, again, full disclosure, I kind of want somebody to see it. And Theo didn't want anybody to see it, except the person that he was with at that moment. And my experience, I'm 68 now, my experience in all those years about giving and receiving is that it's most fun when you can take no credit for it. I love to give secretly and to be inventive and creative with it. And so that's kind of embedded in the character of Theo. But don't we all love kindness? And couldn't the world stand more of it? Yeah, thank you. And it is the easiest thing in the world to do. About the time that this book came out, just a little bit after Theo came out, there was another wonderful book written by David Brooks called How to Know a Person. I don't know if y'all read that. It's a really beautiful work. And it's about how to know people, how to become, conversational and know people. But he says one of the easiest things for all of us to do is just have a conversation. And he said maybe the best place to do that is on a park bench, which is exactly where Theo engaged people in his bestowals. But just to have a conversation, we can all do it. We can all have a meal in our homes. We can invite people to lunch or whatever. And if we can kind of go over the top and offer a gift to somebody, it's just plain fun. My brother Gary, can I talk about my brother Gary?
Yeah, absolutely.
So my brother Gary, who passed away in 2012, he was my best friend. He was my mentor. He was my next door neighbor when he lived in the country. He was kind of my spiritual guide. He was my hero. He was all of those things. And if there was a person that I modeled the Theo character after, it was my brother Gary. And one of the things that I loved about him was how hospitable he was. He was not a good cook. His house was not fancy. The plates, the dishes didn't match. The chairs didn't match. But he used to love to have people into his home. And whenever they came, and he would usually get 10 or 12 people at a time, and did it very, very frequently. When they got there, he always had a gift for them. He would pray for them before the meal, and after the meal, he would pray for them again. But he was just so warm and so gracious and generous with his kindness that I think, watching him has made me want to be more of that myself. Now, whether I've gotten there or not is questionable, but I want to be like that, and I want to be like the old man. And my guess is I probably want to be like a whole bunch of you folks in the room. Ron, I want to be like you. Cameron, Cameron is one of the kindest people in our community. I don't know if you know much about what he does, but the way that he volunteers and gives his time to us with no recognition, I don't think with any remuneration, big word for money, but he loves our community, and that's the kind of kindness that I see and that I want to more and more flesh out in my own life. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you. That's very nice.
I mean,
Yeah. So, Alan the lawyer, Alan the judge, we saw some of that, maybe inspired by real experience in life on the bench and a different side of humanity you may have come in close contact with.
Yeah.
And you made a kind of a philosophical statement in the book about bad mercy being better than bad justice.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little about that
Yeah,
perspective?
I can. Y'all might remember that part of the book, Kendrick, who is the victim of a crime. The mother of his child was killed in an automobile accident, and his daughter was very badly wounded. And Kendrick is talking with the DA. The DA is just kind of saying, what do you think would be fair for the sentence? That's at least the subtext. And Kendrick, I'm going to assume some of y'all, I'd like to think everybody, but I know this has read the book. But at one point, Kendrick says to the DA, do you remember me? And the DA says, I don't. Where would I know you from? He said, well, you had me put in jail. I was in jail when my daughter nearly died. And he said, I was in jail for something that I didn't do. And I know you hear that all the time, Mr. DA, but sometimes it's true. And it is. Sometimes very true. And he makes the statement, it's something actually that his grandmother told him. If you have to err on one side or the other, bad justice or bad mercy, err on the side of bad mercy. When I was a judge, and I was just a judge for a couple of years up in Harris County, and early on I told the courtroom deputies, y'all know a lot more about criminal procedure than I do. I'd never done criminal work before. I'd done civil work. And so you have carte blanche to correct me, counsel me, whatever. I will not be hurt if you tell me I'm doing something wrong. Well, early on, one of the deputies who I really love, I make mention of him in the new book, he came and he said, Judge, you're way too soft. So it's not that big a deal, but you got to tighten up. And I told him, Jimmy, I have been forgiven of so much in my life that I cannot help but be merciful to others. And until I figure out how to do this right, I'm going to always choose mercy, because bad mercy doesn't hurt nearly as bad justice. I did have the sheriff come sit with me one day on the bench to see how I handled all of my cases. And I said, I don't want to do anything that would offend your deputies, because we need them and they're my friends and I respect and I love what they do for our community. But I want you to tell me I'm doing something right or wrong. And he sat with me and he said, you're doing just fine. And so, and the scene about the man who was driving the car that killed the woman and injured the little girl, which for me personally is, to me, that's the high watermark of the book. But one day I was sitting in my office, and the deputies brought this very diminutive Guatemalan man to my office. He was shackled and handcuffed and terrified. He was terrified. And so I told him to please take off the cuffs and the shackles. And he sat next to me, and I held his hand. And I said, don't be afraid. I've got a job to do, but we're gonna work this out. I hired a translator to come in so we could have a conversation. And I dealt with the criminal matter that had to be dealt with. And then I said, would you tell me your story? And he told me exactly the story that is in the book. I work up in Noonan. I'm a bricklayer. My daughter has cancer. I got deported, and there's no way I can stay away from my wife and my daughter. And I used his name up until the last draft of the book, his actual name. And I thought it might jeopardize him if I did that, so I changed it. But I've got a little prayer book that I use in my morning prayers, and his name is there. And whenever I see his name, I think about that moment. And that was a situation where justice and mercy, I mean, they both worked just fine together in the right proportion. But that's the only true scene in the book, was the encounter that I had with what I call the little Guatemalan. Yeah.
Oh,
Questions from the audience?
great.
Y'all are great listeners. Thank y'all.
Oh, this is a great question. This is oddly. I was going to ask a kind of a similar version of this. Yeah, this is. This is great. This is really, yeah.
Did y'all just, you realize what he just did? He just said, I had a really great question I was going to ask you.
Yeah, and they just wrote it better than I could have. Columbus is trying to foster a growing film industry. What are the chances we see a Theo movie? My only addition to that was who plays Theo in the Netflix series.
Yeah. My imagination is not that grandiose, but I will say this. While I was writing the book, I had a playlist that I put together of, I don't know, maybe 350 songs. It's all movie music, and it's that real lovely, lush, gushing music that makes you cry, at the end of the movie. And I cried and cried and cried while I was writing this book. And it was interesting how there were times I would be writing a scene and the music would just hit at this perfect moment. And I could imagine the scene. And I could see the characters. But I didn't let my imagination go too far with that. So maybe one of these days. I've got friends who are screenwriters. And so maybe it'll turn into a movie one day. If you let us dye your hair, I'm thinking you'd be okay.
Oh, well, if you hang around another year, you won't have to dye it. This is great. It's pretty clear that the name Theo was not chosen casually. Do the names of other key characters hold significant meaning?
Most of them, no. I've just grabbed a name and I stuck with it. The name Asher Glisten was deliberate. Asher it's an Old Testament name. It means happy. And the word glisten, of course, just has a radiance about it. And I wanted the artist to be that kind of personality. A lot of artists who I know are not that way. And I think that sometimes that in the name of art, not just this kind, but any kind of art, the creatives among us feel like they have to kind of go through life with a scowl. This is a really ugly thing for me to say, and that's a gross generalization. But I do think sometimes there's this misperception that if we scowl, we're taken more seriously. Case in point, there's a great book called The 50s by David Halberstam. A remarkable book of history, and we can trace almost everything that's happening in the current age, the current day, back to the 50s, the post-World War II era. Well, of all the things that happened in the 50s, and it was a time of remarkable change, he said one of the most important aspects of the 50s was Elvis Presley. And he said that Elvis Presley learned early in his career that it would serve him well if he did not smile, because people would take him serious. And this was Marlon Brando, James Dean, some of the other, some of the teen guys, just kind of, they're kind of tough guys. I have gotten one criticism about the book. It was very well intended and it was very kind, but the guy said, it's kind of cotton candy. And I said, well, you know, there's about 10 people that get killed in this book. I said, this isn't cotton candy. This is real life. But I will not apologize for having hope. And I think that's the offensive agent to some people, that people could have hope in a world as broken as in ours. I've got a lot of hope. I am hopelessly hopeful. And it comes out in the book. Mm-hmm.
This is an interesting connection to that statement, and maybe, well, you let us know. After all these years, why do you still follow Jesus?
Yeah.
That was a great effect.
Yeah,
by the way,
thank you.
from
And
here.
I appreciate the question. I will refer you to a passage of Scripture if you read the Bible. And let me say this too. Again, I don't have an agenda. I wrote this book for as many people as I thought could possibly read it, believer in Christ or not, other faith, no faith. I wanted this book to be read by anybody who likes a good story. But I cannot divorce myself from that part of who I am. That is the core of my being. So you might remember there was a time that Jesus was preaching to a very large crowd of people. And his teachings were hard. He said really hard things at times. And the whole crowd left, except his 12 buddies. And Jesus said to them, do y'all want to go too? And they said, where would we go? So to answer your question, where would I go? I've been to a lot of the other places. I've been around people who've been to a lot of the other places. And there is nothing about life apart from Christ that attracts me. I believe fervently that the highest aspiration of the human soul is to love. And Jesus said as much. There was a lawyer that tried to trick him in a question one time, and Jesus said the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. This is the first and greatest commandment. And so if love is the highest aspiration, then it came to my mind years ago, how do I define it? Is my definition of love any different or better than Hitler's definition of love? Or somebody really mean and vicious, their definition of love? And I started looking for the definition of love. And so I read a lot of books of people who had explored that. And at the end of my trying to answer the question, there was a man on a cross. So where would I go? That's my answer to the question, where would I go? Thank you for that question.
Yeah. Which character in the book do you most relate to? Most autobiographical? And in what ways? And you love talking about yourself, so I'm so excited about this. I've been saving this one here.
Yeah.
He's at his most comfortable.
I like all the characters. I have interests in common, obviously, with Theo, but I'm not Theo. I like Tony a lot. And I will tell you this, that I have a third book in mind. And it's going to be him. I like people who have lived hard lives and still have some joie de vivre about them. And Tony, you know, he's a curmudgeon and he's kind of cranky, but I like his humor. I like his candor. He's the kind of guy I think I would love to spend time with, you know, get a beer with and talk about, or fuss about something. Tony would love to fuss with me about Jesus, I'm sure. But I really like him as a character. And the fact that he reads books, the fact that he sits on the sidewalk and engages with people, I like him a lot. Yeah.
That's good. Tony.
Thank y'all for these questions.
Yeah, these are great. Would you say that there is one, in your mind, overarching theme in the book, and what in your life gave you the idea for that theme?
Okay. Yeah, I do have one theme that sticks out in my mind. It is the theme of, let me use the word presence. There's another word for that, incarnation. But presence. I don't know if you noticed, but conspicuously absent from the text are two things. One is any reference to partisanship. I would even broaden that to say that there's really no political content to the book at all. And I very, very vigilantly stayed away from that. The second is there is no technology. There was, with this exception, Pierce on the bench when he got the cell phone and he was berating his daughter, and Theo stood up and sang the national anthem of Portugal to run him off, right? And then at the Thanksgiving meal, when Pierce put the offending agent on the table, that was really deliberate. And another thing that's conspicuously absent is COVID. I didn't give any time stamps to the book except the burning of the Notre Dame. And I wish I had left that out so that even that would not be a time stamp. But the book is set kind of in the last 5, 6, 8 years. And there's no reference to COVID. But I don't think it hurts the story, and nobody has criticized me on that ground yet. But my point is this. I think we learned through COVID, I learned through COVID, that we cannot live our lives virtually. We have to live them present to one another. And so the Word became flesh. That's the doctrine of the incarnation in the gospel. And it's interesting to me that Jesus came to the world when there was no technology, no printing press, no harnessed electricity, nothing of that sort. All of the work that he did required him to be this close. So he could look at the person, and he could touch them, and he could heal their eyes, and he could spit on his hands and do whatever he had to do. He touched a lot. And Theo did that. When Mrs. Gidley suggested to him, why don't you just buy all of the portraits and get it over with? Right? Isn't that the American mindset? You're being so inefficient. And Theo said, that's the whole project. To be close to people, to be present with people, to talk, to hear their story, to ask questions, to see their hurt, to sense their sadness, and to enter into it. And again, this has been one of the gratifying parts of the correspondence we've gotten is just this repeated reference to, I want to be more involved with people. I want to be closer to people. I want my life to be more people rich. And to me, that's kind of the big thing, is we have to live present to one another. I think a lot of times we mistake wisdom as this thing that stays up in our head, and we just kind of deposit it at the right time when people might be impressed. I'm more and more convinced that wisdom is the ability to sit silently and to enter into another person's story and try to imagine life through their eyes without saying a thing. Just be quiet and listen. And then when you do speak, make sure that it's something that matters. So Theo of Golden, again, it's an expression of my faith. He walked among us. There's one translation of the scripture that I love so much. It's in John chapter 1 where it says that the Word became flesh. But it says he moved into the neighborhood. And I think Theo would say to us, if we're going to be a community that really is worth the attention and the affection of people, we've got to move into the neighborhood. And we've got to open our doors, and we've got to be willing to sit and have a conversation. That's good. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question before we do. When we wrap up, everybody please remain seated. I'm going to shoot Mr. Levi here to the autograph line. I don't want anybody on this side trying to hug his neck. Okay, we want him to get to the line quick. And then those people that have the number who are getting their books signed before the event but weren't able to, you will rise and go get in line, and then I'll let everybody else go get in line. But we're going to let you ask one more question. to wrap things up, and then we'll start the autograph line. Thanks.
This has to be a good one.
They've all been good.
Let's end on a high note. All right, sadness was a big theme in the book.
Yeah.
No, but sadness. One of the final chapters, it'd be difficult to read the whole thing because it's pretty emotional. Talks about humanity and the coexistence of joy and sadness, and the longer we live, the sadness gets beat into us.
Yeah.
And why is that connection with people, in your perspective, that message of slowing down, being present, connecting, so important for you to tell through this story?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, it's honest. I mean, we live in a broken world. And I think we live in a time, especially with social media mediating our existences, and we can hide the hard stuff, the dark stuff. We're tempted, I think, to live in a state of denial that is not wise, it's not true, it's not healthy. And Theo, being an 86-year-old man, has seen a lot of hurt in the world. He's lived through wars, he's lived through personal tragedy, and we can stuff it down and act like it never happened, or we can deal with it. And Theo, I think, when he looked at the portraits, could see something. It may have just been his projection onto the portraits. But I think the truth of the matter is that if any two of us in this room sat down and talked, and one were to ask the other, can you tell me something in your life that ever made you sad? None of us would have to look too hard or think very long to come up with the answer. And so Theo, in that part of the book, which incidentally it was added at the 11th hour and the 59th minute of the book. I just thought it needed to be in there. There is a passage that whoever the writer of Ecclesiastes, believed to be Solomon, wrote, where it says that those who increase their knowledge increase their sorrow. Those who grow in wisdom grow in grief. And one time my men's group got together and we talked about that. Do you think as we get older we get sadder? And the consensus was, by the time we had fleshed it out, was yeah, we do, because we've seen so much wrong with the world. But the paradox is, if we have hope, is that the sadness does not trump the story. It does not swallow up the story. There is a joy at the other end of the spectrum that is just as alive. Years ago, in one of the very, very, very few songs that I wrote that I consider overtly Christian, I don't even like the term, but it was about Jesus, and it said, he seemed a walking contradiction, perfect joy and perfect sadness. His perfect sanity seemed madness in this world where he is a stranger. And I think for us in life, the challenge is to keep those two things, the joy and the sadness, in tension. Theo does make the point that if sadness is well curated, it might well lead to a really deep and beautiful love. It can either make us bitter or it can make us more the people that we're supposed to be. And just speaking in my own life, I mean, there are things that have saddened me, and there are things in the world that happen around me now that sadden me. I cry more at the news when I watch it. I rarely watch the news, but I cry watching the news anymore. And I think it's because that grief of just being in a broken place comes to the surface. But it's not the end of the story. It's just, those are just some of the stones we have to step across to get to the finish line. I will say this. There's been no sadness tonight.
This has been fun.
Okay, Cameron, if you'll grab him and run. Again, no hugging. Come on. So, if you have a number, if you're in the pre-event sales and you have one of the numbers, please head over to my friend Janine, who's waving right now, and get in line. Everybody else just sit still for a minute. I do want to remind folks that we do have books for sale still. They make wonderful gifts. Christmas is only 9.5 months away. So pick up several and get them autographed tonight. And don't worry, we will be here. He will sign every book, and we'll be here until as long as everybody wants to stay. Really appreciate you coming. Okay, if my 12 are already in line, okay, everybody can rise up and get on in line. Thank you.